Don't go upstairs, Mom. It's messy, Eric said. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a strange thing to say. I had raised 2 children in a small farmhouse. I had seen every kind of mess you could imagine. Toys all over the floor, socks under the couch, muddy boots in the hall. There was no mess I couldn't handle, but something in his voice and the quick look his wife gave him made me wonder. I stood in their hallway with my coat still on, holding a basket of cinnamon rolls I had made. The smell of them was the only warm thing in the house at that moment. Eric stepped closer and guided me to the kitchen. It's really not a good idea to go up, he said. The kids have made a fort up there. It's blankets and chairs and a big mess. We'll just stay in the kitchen. I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. This new house had been a gift from me, or more exactly, a gift from my money. 2 years ago, Eric and his wife, Julia, had found a perfect house, but they needed a little help with the down payment. I wrote them a check that covered almost a third of the cost. I told myself it was for our family gatherings for my grandchildren's future and for the peace of mind of knowing my son had a home. But I had only been in that house a few times. Julia always had an excuse. The kids had homework. They were about to leave. The house was a mess. I told myself not to take it personally, but now, as I sat at their clean kitchen table, drinking coffee, and listening to Julia talk about her new business, I couldn't stop thinking about the upstairs. It wasn't that I cared about a mess. It was the sharp, nervous tone in Eric's voice when he had stopped me. When Julia left to take a phone call, I tried to focus on my coffee, but my eyes kept looking at the stairs. The door to the upstairs hall was half closed. From where I sat, I could see the bottom 2 steps. They were perfectly clean. There were no blankets or toys. Eric saw me looking at the stairs and moved in his seat. "So, Mom," he said, sounding a little too cheerful, "how is your garden this year?" "About the same," I said. "Not many roses, but, you know." I let my words fade and took another drink of coffee. His eyes quickly looked up at the stairs. That's when I knew. Whatever was up there, it wasn't a blanket fort. The strange thing was that my mind didn't immediately think of something bad. I wanted to believe in my son's goodness. But the truth is, when you have lived for 70 years, you learn to spot a lie by the way it tries to smile at you. And Eric's smile was starting to disappear. The conversation that followed was slow and awkward. It was as if we were both walking on thin ice, afraid of the cracks we could hear under our feet. Julia came back, her phone pressed to her ear, whispering something sharp and fast to the person on the other end. She walked past me, without looking at me, and went into the pantry, closing the door behind her. I looked at my hands, wrapped around the coffee cup. They weren't as steady as they used to be, and the skin was thinner now, with more visible veins. But these hands had carried laundry baskets up and down stairs for decades, hauled groceries in snowstorms, and worked in gardens in the summer heat. They had worked, and they had built. This house, whatever was in it, was made possible by these hands. From somewhere above, I heard a faint thud, like a door closing. It was too heavy for a child. It was too intentional. "Kids playing?" I asked. Eric looked up. "Yeah, they're cleaning up their toys," he said, his voice light but his shoulders getting tense. "You know how it is." I did know, and I also knew there was something wrong in the way he said it. When Julia came out of the pantry, she was all smiles. "Eric, could you help me move some boxes in the garage?" she said. "Mom can relax here." She put a gentle hand on my shoulder, the way people do to strangers in a waiting room. They left together through the back door. I could hear their voices and their footsteps on the driveway gravel. The kitchen became silent, and that silence gave me my answer. Whatever was upstairs, they didn't want me to see it, and they had both gone outside. I stood up slowly, putting my coffee cup down, without a sound. My knees hurt, but I moved toward the stairs anyway. Each step felt like I was peeling away a layer of a lie, of years spent telling myself that their distance was because they were busy, not because they were cold. The upstairs hallway smelled a little of cedar, the smell of a built-in closet at the end of the hall. I walked past the children's rooms. The beds were neatly made. There was no chaos, no fort. At the end of the hall, Eric's office door was slightly open. And there, against the far wall, was the safe. The door was wide open. From the doorway, I could see the empty shelves inside. There was a faint outline of dust where my mother's pearl brooch had been. The metal was bare where my important papers should have been. My heart beat slowly and heavily. It wasn't messy upstairs at all. It was empty. I walked closer, almost afraid to breathe. The faint smell of metal and dust came from the open safe, like the smell of a room that has been closed for a long time. It used to be full, not with gold or a lot of money, but with the important things from my life. The paper for my small cottage. The envelope with my will, which I had changed after Harold died. A small velvet box that held my mother's pearls. It was the only thing she had been able to pass down to me after a lifetime of hard work. And there had been a thick envelope of savings. Not all the money I had, but enough to make sure I didn't worry at night. I remembered the last time I had opened it, almost 6 months ago, to put in the birth certificates of Eric's children for safekeeping. He had stood next to me that day, talking, his eyes looking at the stack of envelopes more than once. I hadn't thought anything of it. He was my son. You don't suspect your own child. Now, there was nothing. Not a paperclip. Not even the familiar weight of the old brass key I had kept on the top shelf. I reached out, touching the cold metal inside, as if the memories could still be hiding there, tucked into some invisible corner. But it was as empty as the hall behind me. My heart was pounding in my ears, but my thoughts were surprisingly clear. Whoever had opened that safe had done it carefully. There was no damage to the lock, no sign of a break-in. That meant one thing. Someone had the key or the code. Someone I had trusted. I turned and looked around the room. Eric's desk was in its usual neatness. Papers were stacked. Pens were in their holder, but the top drawer was slightly open. Inside, I saw the edge of a folded paper, my safe's code, in my own handwriting. I had given it to him last winter when I was sick with the flu, and he had offered to get some papers for me. I had thanked him for being so helpful. Now, standing in his quiet office, that thank you felt like ash in my mouth. Downstairs, the back door slammed shut. Their voices came faintly up the stairs, getting closer now. I took one last look at the empty safe, then closed its door gently, the way you might cover someone who has already passed away. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs, I had already decided there would be no fight today. Not yet. I have lived long enough to know that when you are caught by surprise, the first words you say can be your weakest. And I wasn't going to give Eric and Julia the satisfaction of seeing me upset, asking questions they could easily lie about. So when they came back in through the kitchen door, with dust on their clothes from the garage, I was standing by the sink, cleaning my coffee cup. "Did you find everything you needed?" I asked, as if nothing in the world had changed in the last 10 minutes. Eric nodded. "Yeah, thanks. Julia has those boxes sorted now. Sorry to leave you alone." I smiled. It was the kind of smile you give to people you have already started to remove from your life. "It's fine. I was just enjoying the quiet." Julia walked past me to the refrigerator, humming. I saw her quickly look at Eric. It told me two things. She knew, and she was waiting to see if I did. I left soon after, my cinnamon rolls still in their basket, because Julia had already made dessert for the kids. In the driveway, Eric hugged me stiffly, his chin just touching the top of my head. Drive safe, Mom. Safe. The word echoed in my ears all the way home. My small cottage felt different when I unlocked the door. The air seemed stiller, the rooms quieter. But maybe that was just me carrying this new, sharp realization through them. I put the untouched cinnamon rolls on the counter and went straight to my desk. The first thing I checked was the small fireproof box in the bottom drawer. My passport was still there, so was the spare checkbook, but the envelope with the last 2 years of bank statements was gone. I knew, because I keep things in neat piles, and the empty space was as obvious as a missing tooth. I sat down slowly. If Eric had taken papers from here and emptied the safe, then he had already been in my house without me knowing, and not just once, but at least twice. The phone was on the corner of my desk. I had the bank's number saved in my contacts. I pressed it before I could talk myself out of it. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Lawson," the manager, Susan, said when she recognized my voice. "How can I help you today? I need to know if there's been any strange activity on my accounts in the last month," I said. My voice was steady, but I had to press my other hand against my knee to stop it from shaking. There was a pause. I heard the sound of keys tapping. "Well, I do see a few attempted transfers that our security system stopped. They were blocked because the request came from a new device. One was for $8,000 and another for $15,000. When, 3 days ago and last Tuesday," I let out a slow breath. 3 days ago, Eric had come by just to drop off some soup because Julia had said I sounded tired on the phone. Last Tuesday, he had borrowed my car, so I wouldn't have to drive myself to a doctor's appointment. "Mrs. Lawson," Susan said gently, "would you like me to put a temporary stop on your account until we can meet in person?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Stop everything. And I want to cancel the power of attorney my son has right away." Another pause. "Of course. I'll start that process now, but you'll need to come in to sign the papers for the permanent change. I'll be there when you open tomorrow." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time looking at my hands again. They had just made one of the hardest phone calls of my life. Harder than telling people Harold was gone. Harder than signing the papers to sell the family farm. Because this time, I was choosing to close a door on my own child. The late afternoon light came through the room, landing on a photo of Eric when he was 6 years old. He was missing his front teeth, smiling up at the camera, holding a frog in both hands. I remembered drying that frog with one of my good towels because he had said it was cold and needed a blanket. I felt a stinging behind my eyes, but I didn't let the tears fall. That little boy was gone. The man who had taken his place had looked me in the eye today and told me not to go upstairs. And I had, and found my safe as empty as the space where trust should have been. I stood up, locked the fireproof box, and put the key in my pocket. Tonight, I would make lists of all my accounts, money, and papers. And tomorrow morning, I would start making sure they stayed mine. I barely slept that night, not because of the usual pains in my hips or the sound of the old house in the wind, but because of the steady, constant rhythm of my own thoughts. By 6 a.m., I was dressed and ready, my purse packed with every form of identification I owned. I had also put in the small notebook I had kept for years where I had written down my big expenses. Looking at the entries from the past 10 years was like reading a list of blind faith. Checks for Eric's emergency car repairs, the down payment on the house, money for his business idea that failed in less than 6 months. The bank opened at 9 a.m., but I arrived 20 minutes early. The parking lot was still half empty. When Susan, the manager, saw me through the glass, she came at once to let me in. "I've already prepared the paperwork to freeze your accounts and remove the power of attorney," she said, leading me into her office. "But I'll need you to look at and sign every page." The pen felt heavier than it should have as I signed. Each stroke was a small cutting of a tie, not from the money itself, but from the years I had believed it was a bridge between me and my son. When we were finished, Susan leaned forward. Do you want to add any security measures? Two-step verification, a change of address for your statements, maybe even new account numbers. Yes, I said, my voice firm. All of it. And I want any requests for my accounts to require me to be there in person. No exceptions. Her eyes became softer. Understood. From there, I walked 2 blocks to my lawyer's office. Michael Daniels had been handling my business since Harold passed away. He greeted me with a puzzled smile. Martha, you look like you've been up all night. What's going on? I sat across from him and told him everything. The safe, the missing things, the attempted transfers. He didn't interrupt, but his jaw tightened. We'll need to revise your will, he said when I finished. And I strongly suggest setting up a living trust for your assets. It'll keep them out of reach unless you give permission, and it's harder to challenge than a will. He took out forms, explaining each step. We talked about removing Eric entirely as a person in charge of my will and replacing him with a neutral third party. We also added a rule. Any family member who challenged my estate would lose their inheritance. It was all business, but underneath it was a quiet, heavy feeling. This wasn't just legal work. This was tearing down the trust one had spent a lifetime building. When the documents were ready for my signature later that week, Michael said gently, I know this isn't easy. No, I said, meeting his gaze, but it's necessary. And at my age, you stop putting off what's necessary. Back home, I put the new keys and passwords in a small envelope and slid it into the bottom of my sewing box, a place no one but me ever touched. Then I made tea and sat by the kitchen window, watching the birds fly between the hedges. The phone rang twice that afternoon. Both times the caller ID showed Eric's number. I let it go to voicemail. His voice, tense and too fast, spilled out. Mom, we need to talk. Call me back, please. Please. I wondered if that word, please, would have come so easily if the safe had been full and the account still open. I wrapped my hands around my teacup, letting the warmth soak in. The pain in my chest was still there, but it was no longer a hollow pain. It was filling with something stronger, a sense of determination. It was late Saturday morning when the knock came. 3 quick knocks, then a pause. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I thought it might be Eric, ready to come in with his explanations. But when I opened the door, it was Chloe, my oldest granddaughter. She was holding a paper bag from the bakery, her hair in a messy bun, a pink scarf around her neck. Hi, Grandma, she said, her smile warm but a little unsure. I brought you those scones you like. I stepped aside to let her in. What's the occasion? She said, setting the bag on the counter. No occasion. I just wanted to see you. We made tea together, moving around each other in the small kitchen as easily as if she had grown up there, which in a way she had. When she was little, I would watch her after school, teaching her how to braid dough or letting her sprinkle cinnamon on pies. Once we were sitting at the table, she looked down at her mug and said quietly, Dad's not happy. I stirred my tea slowly. I can imagine he's not. He said you've made some changes with the bank. And other things. That's right. She bit her lip. He wouldn't tell me exactly what happened, but I can tell he's upset. And Julia... Chloe stopped herself, looking at me. Well, she's been making little comments about you being stubborn, about you not trusting them. I looked at her. Do you think I'm being stubborn, Chloe? Her answer came without hesitation. No, I think you've been too trusting for too long. For a moment, I had to look away. It wasn't anger that hurt. It was relief. Someone in that house saw me clearly. I don't know the details, she went on. And you don't have to tell me, but I just wanted you to know I'm on your side. I know how much you've done for all of us." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're the only one who has said that in a very long time." She squeezed my fingers. "I've seen it, Grandma. I've seen the way you've helped and how they take it for granted. You don't deserve that." We talked for nearly an hour about her classes, her friends, and the apartment she hoped to rent after she graduated. Not once did she ask for anything. Not once did she hint at needing money. When she left, she hugged me tighter than usual. "Call me if you need anything." Okay? After she was gone, the house felt different than it had all week. The betrayal was still there, sharp as ever. But now there was something else on top of it. A quiet reminder that not all ties in a family are bad. Some are worth holding on to. By Monday morning, the phone had become a constant reminder that Eric was not used to waiting for answers. The first call came at 8:12 a.m., before I had even finished my toast. I let it ring. At 8:17, another. Then 8:25. By 9 a.m., I had counted 7 missed calls and 3 voicemails. The most recent one was tight and clipped. "Mom, I don't know what's going on, but we need to clear this up before things get out of hand. Call me back." Clear this up, as if it were a spilled cup of coffee between us instead of an empty safe and an attempted theft. I took my tea into the living room and left the phone on the kitchen counter where its vibration couldn't bother me. Outside, the first real snow of the season was falling. By mid-morning, Julia's name appeared on the screen. I didn't answer. A minute later came a text message. "We can explain. Please give us a chance before you do something we'll all regret." There was something almost funny in the idea that I hadn't already done something, but I didn't reply. At 11, the home phone rang, the one hardly anyone uses anymore. For a second, I thought about answering, thinking it might be Chloe, but it was Eric again. "Mom, please," his voice pleaded on the answering machine. "You're making a mistake. We love you. Whatever you think happened, you're wrong. Let's just talk. Okay? I can come over right now." I sat perfectly still, listening to his words. Love, he had said, the same word he had used when I signed the check for his house, for his second car, for his temporary business loan. Love wrapped around a request like a ribbon around an empty box. Around noon, I walked to the hall closet and took out my coat. If they wanted to find me at home, they would be disappointed. I had nowhere special to go, just the need to breathe air that wasn't heavy with their voices. The cold was refreshing. I walked 3 blocks to the small park where the benches were covered in snow, and the pond was still under a thin layer of ice. A young couple walked past me, laughing, their breath making small clouds in the air. I wondered if they had any idea how quickly warmth could turn to cold between people who once promised each other everything. When I returned, the red light on the answering machine was blinking fast. 12 new messages. I didn't play them. Instead, I went into the kitchen and opened the small drawer by the sink, the one where I kept spare keys. Harold's old habit, "Never put all your trust in one lock," he used to say. I looked through the keys until I found the key to the shed in the backyard. The shed was dusty and cold, but it still smelled a little of cedar from the shelves Harold had built. On the top shelf, behind a box of old jars, was a smaller lockbox, one Eric didn't know about. Inside was a stack of photos, a few pieces of jewelry that had never been in the house safe, and a short list of my most important account numbers and contacts. I touched the pearl earrings, cool and smooth, and felt a small sense of relief in my chest. He hadn't taken everything. He didn't even know about these. Back inside, the phone started ringing again. I stood in the kitchen, watching it buzz on the counter until it finally stopped. I knew this silence wouldn't last. Sooner or later, Eric would stop circling and come straight to me. And when he did, I would be ready. It was Thursday afternoon when the knock came. Not a soft tap, but a steady, strong rhythm. The kind of knock that says, I know you're in there, and I'm not leaving. I opened the door to find Eric on the porch. Snowflakes were in his dark hair, and his jaw was tight. He wasn't alone. Julia stood behind him, wrapped in a light wool coat, her lips pressed into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mom, Eric said, we need to talk. I stepped back, not saying a word, letting them in. My house felt smaller with them inside, their presence crowding the air. Eric walked to the living room. Julia followed, looking around like she was taking inventory. Eric didn't sit down. You've been avoiding our calls. Yes, I said calmly. He stopped walking. Why? I pointed to the couch. If you have something to say, you might as well be comfortable. Reluctantly, they sat. Julia smoothed her coat, then put her hands neatly in her lap. Eric leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. We heard from the bank. You froze your accounts. You canceled my power of attorney. He let out a sharp breath. That's extreme, Mom. Is it? I asked. Yes. Julia said, her voice cool. And it makes it look like you don't trust us. I looked at her. Should I? Eric moved in his seat. This is about the safe, isn't it? I said nothing, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Eric's voice softened. Mom, you must have misunderstood. I went into the safe because we needed the insurance papers for the house. I didn't take anything else. My eyes didn't leave his. Then where are my mother's pearls? He blinked. I don't know. Maybe you moved them. And the bank statements from my desk? His jaw tightened. You're remembering wrong. Julia leaned forward, her voice suddenly sweet. Martha, stress can make us forget things. Maybe you misplaced them. Let's not turn this into something ugly over a misunderstanding. I let out a breath. A misunderstanding is when someone forgets to bring home milk. This is theft. Eric's voice got louder. We're your family. We've always looked out for you. I gave a short, humorless laugh. Looked out for me, or looked out for my money? The red color that spread up his neck told me I had hit the truth. Julia sat up straight. If you really think we would steal from you, then I don't know what to say. But you're making a mistake cutting us out like this. It's not healthy. What's not healthy, I said quietly, is letting people take everything from you while you smile and pretend you don't notice. Eric stood up quickly, putting his hands in his pockets. So that's it. You've already decided we're guilty. I've decided, I said, standing up to face him, that my trust is no longer yours to use. He stared at me for a long time, his breath shallow. You're going to regret this. I felt the old pain in my chest, not from fear, but from knowing how far the boy I raised had gone. No, Eric, I said softly. For the first time in years, I won't. Julia let out a sharp breath, as if she was about to say something, then decided not to. Eric turned toward the door. They left without another word. The cold air rushed in for a moment before I closed the door behind them. For a long time, I stood with my hand on the doorknob, feeling the vibrations of their leaving fade. They had come to get back control. Instead, they had walked out with less than they came with, and I intended to keep it that way. The next morning, I called a locksmith. He came just after 10 a.m. He was a thin man in his 60s with quick, skilled hands and a quiet way of doing things. Front and back doors, he asked. All of them, I said. And I want deadbolts that can't be opened from the outside without a key. No spare keys left under mats or flower pots. He gave me a knowing look, but he didn't ask any questions. By the time he was finished, the old brass knobs Harold had installed decades ago were gone, replaced by solid steel locks that clicked shut with a final sound. He handed me 3 keys. I put one in my pocket, one in the lockbox in the shed, and the third in a small envelope addressed to Chloe. Next came the papers. I took every file from my desk and spread them out on the dining room table. Insurance policies, property deeds, medical records, tax returns. I went through each one, removing anything that had Eric's name or gave him access. The will that Michael and I had changed earlier in the week was still waiting for my signature at his office. I made a note to stop by tomorrow. For now, I wrote a letter, sealed and dated, saying clearly that Eric Lawson was to have no control over my money, property, or medical decisions. I put it with the rest of my important papers. In the early afternoon, I called my homeowner's insurance company. Add a security rider. I told them, and note that no one is allowed to be on my property without my written permission. They asked if something had happened. I gave them the simplest answer, just taking precautions. When I hung up, I walked through the house slowly, room by room. It felt different already, not because of the locks or the papers, but because I had drawn a line and put myself on the right side of it. In the living room, I paused in front of the old oak cabinet where Harold used to keep his ledgers. On the top shelf was a shoebox full of photos. Eric in overalls holding his first fishing rod. Eric at 16 proudly showing me his new driver's license. Eric on his wedding day, his arm tight around Julia's waist. I closed the box gently. The boy in those pictures wasn't the man who had stood in my living room yesterday, and I couldn't spend the rest of my life trying to bring him back. Just before dark, my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Dad's furious. Says you've locked him out of your life. Do you want me to come over?" "Not tonight," I replied, "but soon. I'm all right." The truth was, I was more than all right. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the kitchen window. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving a thin, clean layer over the yard. No footprints, no tracks. It hit me then. This was how I wanted my life to look from now on. Quiet, whole, untouched by anyone who thought my trust was theirs to take. I drank my tea slowly, letting the warmth spread through me. Tomorrow, I'd sign the will, and that would be the last piece of the wall I was building between myself and Eric. And once it was up, I wasn't letting him find a single crack. Sunday afternoon brought a pale winter sun, and the smell of wood smoke from the neighbor's chimney. I was folding laundry when a familiar knock sounded. 2 short taps, a pause, then one more. When I opened the door, there stood Evelyn Harper, my neighbor of 30 years, with a covered plate in her hands. "I baked you an apple tart," she said. "I made too much for just me." We had shared 1,000 little visits like this over the years. Trading pies for tomatoes, swapping recipes, sitting on each other's porches on summer nights. But today, I felt a strange sense of relief at the sight of her, as if she were a lifeline thrown across a wide gap. I set the tart on the counter and poured us both tea. We sat in the kitchen, steam coming up between us. Evelyn looked at me for a moment, then said, "You've been quiet lately, not like you." I hesitated, then decided there was no reason to hide the truth from her. "Eric and Julia have been overstepping," I said carefully. "I had to make some changes, big ones." Her eyes narrowed. "Overstepping how?" I told her about the safe, the missing things, the bank transfers, and the meeting in my living room. I didn't make it sound more dramatic than it was. I just gave her the facts. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. I wish I could say I was surprised. That made me look up. "You're not." Evelyn sighed. "I've watched them, Martha, the way they come in when they want something, then disappear when they don't. Harold never would have stood for it." The mention of Harold's name made my throat feel tight, but it wasn't sadness. It was a reminder of what it felt like to have someone on your side without conditions. "I've locked things down now," I said. Change the will, change the locks, stop their access. Good, she said firmly. Don't you dare feel guilty about that. I don't feel guilty. I admitted. I feel lighter. But there's a part of me that still wonders how it came to this. Evelyn reached across the table and put her hand over mine. You gave them too much trust for too long. And some people mistake trust for weakness. You're not weak, Martha. You just didn't want to see what was right in front of you. Her words stayed with me, sinking deep. We talked about other things after that. Her brother's surgery, the rumor about the hardware store changing owners, the small things that hold a life together. But under it all, I felt a quiet strength, like a hand pressed firmly against my back. When Evelyn left, she hugged me for a moment longer than usual. You're doing the right thing, she said. Don't let them make you think otherwise. After she had gone, I cut myself a slice of her tart and sat by the window. The late sun was shining on the snow, making it look golden in places. Across the yard, Evelyn's kitchen light came on, and I could see her moving around, busy with her own small routines. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone in this. There were still people who saw me, not for what I could give, but for who I was, and that, I realized, was worth more than anything in that empty safe. It was just after lunch on Wednesday when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I looked through the lace curtain, I saw Chloe's small blue car. She got out carrying a grocery bag, and, to my surprise, a thick folder tucked under her arm. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her breath made little clouds as she hurried to the porch. "Hi, Grandma," she said when I opened the door. "I brought you a few things, and I need to talk to you." We put the groceries on the counter. Bread, milk, a jar of my favorite orange jam. I raised an eyebrow at her. This is more than just a visit. Chloe nodded, taking off her scarf. "You're right. I overheard something the other night." I felt my stomach tighten. "What did you overhear?" She opened a folder and slid some papers toward me. They were bank printouts, not mine, but clearly Eric's. Transfers, withdrawals, and a large payment that was waiting to be approved. "I wasn't snooping," she said quickly. "I was using Dad's laptop to print a paper for school. These popped up in the print queue, and then I heard them in the kitchen talking about you." I stayed silent, letting her continue. "They were saying you've overreacted and that you'll calm down eventually. Dad told Julia not to worry, that he'd find a way back in. He said you wouldn't be able to manage everything without him." My jaw tightened. "And what did Julia say?" She laughed. Chloe said flatly, "She said you were too sentimental to cut them off completely, that it's just a matter of time." I took a slow breath. It was one thing to guess, but another to hear it confirmed in my own granddaughter's voice. Chloe leaned forward. "Grandma, I think you need to do more than just change the locks. You should move all your valuable things, every single one of them, to a place they can't get to, and maybe think about a safety deposit box at the bank. I'll take you if you want." I looked at her for a long moment. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't trying to make me feel better before asking for something. She was offering help with no strings attached. "Why are you doing this, Chloe?" I asked quietly. Her eyes became softer. "Because you've always been there for me, and I don't want to see you get hurt any more than you already have." For a moment, I had to turn away, pretending to be busy with the kettle, so she wouldn't see the shine in my eyes. "You're a good girl," I said finally. "Your parents may not like what I'm doing, but I'm not going back on it." "I didn't think you would," she said, smiling faintly. "But you should be ready for them to try harder. They won't just let this go." We spent the next hour going over what I still had in the house. Jewelry, old savings bonds, a few special things that were more meaningful than valuable. She helped me wrap each piece in tissue paper and label it, ready to be moved to the bank vault. Before she left, she paused at the door. "Grandma, if they ever show up here angry or try to pressure you, call me first. Don't deal with them alone." I promised I would, though in truth, I didn't plan on giving Eric or Julia another chance to step foot inside. After she drove away, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder in front of me. Seeing their plans written out gave me a strange sense of calm. They still thought they knew me, still thought I was the same woman who gave out checks at the first sign of need. But that woman was gone, and the one sitting here now had no intention of letting them through another door, real or not, without a key they would never get again. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, just as I had settled into my armchair with a fresh cup of tea and a library book. No phone call, no polite knock. The sharp sound of my front door knob being rattled made me look up. Then came the sound of keys, several of them, trying one lock after another. My heart didn't pound. Instead, it became strangely steady. I put the teacup down, stood up, and walked to the door. The moment I opened it, Eric was there, his coat unbuttoned, his breath making a cloud in the cold air. Julia stood just behind him, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp. "Your keys won't work anymore," I said, my voice calm. I noticed Eric replied tightly, "Why did you change the locks?" "I think you know why." He let out a humorless laugh. "This is ridiculous. We're your family, Mom. We shouldn't be locked out of your life. Yet here you are trying to get in without my permission," I said, leaning against the door frame, not inviting them inside. Julia stepped forward. "We just came to talk face to face. This cold shoulder routine is childish." "I think stealing from your own mother is childish," I said evenly, "and I'm done pretending otherwise." Eric's eyes flashed. "You can't seriously believe." "I do believe it," I said. "I believe it because I saw the empty safe with my own eyes. I believe it because the bank stopped your transfer attempts. And I believe it because I know the difference between help and taking advantage, something you've long since stopped caring about." He ran a hand through his hair, his breath coming faster. "So, you've made up your mind." "That's it." "Yes," I said simply. "That's it." Julia's voice turned sweet. "Martha, think about what you're doing. This will tear the family apart. People will talk. Let them," I said. I'd rather be the woman who protected herself than the woman who was too afraid of gossip to act. Eric took a step closer, lowering his voice as if that might make it more convincing. "We can fix this. Give me the power of attorney back, and I'll make sure everything is handled properly. No more mistakes." I shook my head. "No more access." The wind picked up, sending a swirl of snow across the porch. Julia pulled her coat tighter, her lips becoming a thin line. "You'll regret this, Martha. One day you'll need us, and we won't be there." "Julia," I said quietly, "if that day comes, it will mean I've forgotten who you are. I don't plan on doing that." For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the wind and the faint creak of the porch boards under Eric's shifting weight. Finally, he mumbled something I didn't hear, turned, and went down the steps. Julia followed, but not before giving me one last look, not of sadness, but of calculation. I closed the door and locked both deadbolts. My hands didn't shake. In fact, they felt steadier than they had in weeks. Back in the living room, my tea was still warm. I picked it up and returned to my chair, the book still open to the page I'd left. Outside, I heard the sound of their car starting, then fading down the road. They had tried to force the door today. Next time, I knew it wouldn't be the door they would go after. But whatever their next move, I was ready. I had built my boundaries high and set them deep, and I had no intention of letting them be broken. The following Tuesday, Chloe drove into my driveway right on time, her small blue car making a crunching sound on the thin layer of frost. She got out, her cheeks red from the cold, and gave me a quick hug. "Ready?" she asked, glancing at the tote bag at my feet. Inside the bag, carefully wrapped in tissue paper and bubble wrap, were the last of the valuables I still kept in the house. Harold's watch, my mother's wedding ring, a small box of savings bonds, and the envelopes of photos I wasn't willing to risk losing. The bag wasn't heavy, but it felt important in a different way, as if I were carrying the final pieces of my old life into a safe place. We drove to the bank in a comfortable silence. When we walked in, Susan, the manager, saw me right away. "Mrs. Lawson," she said warmly, "we've got the paperwork for your safety deposit box ready." She led us to the small private room where the vault was. The steel door loomed at the far end, a solid wall between the outside world and what would soon be mine alone. "You've rented a medium-sized box," Susan explained, pulling the long drawer-like container from its slot. "Plenty of space for jewelry, documents, and special things. You'll be the only one with access. No one else can get in, no exceptions." I nodded, more relieved than I expected to feel. Chloe helped me unwrap each item, placing them neatly inside. Harold's watch went in first, its worn leather strap coiled like a sleeping snake. Then my mother's ring, shining faintly under the bright lights. When the box was nearly full, I added one last thing, a short handwritten note folded into an envelope. On the outside, I'd written, "To be opened by Chloe only if I am gone." Inside were the details of my accounts, my lawyer's contact information, and a few lines explaining exactly why I had taken these steps. Once everything was in place, Susan slid the box back into its slot and turned the key. The sound of the lock clicking shut felt like the end of a chapter. Back in the car, Chloe glanced over at me. "Feel better?" I let out a slow breath. "Safer. That's the word." She smiled faintly. "You know, they're going to hate this." "I know," I said, "but I'm not doing it to be mean. I'm doing it because I won't live in fear of my own family." We stopped for coffee on the way back. Sitting by the window of the little cafe, I watched people walk by, their scarves wrapped tight against the wind. Life was going on as it always had, not caring about my small personal war. And yet inside, I felt a sense of ground I had gotten back. When Chloe dropped me off, she waited in the doorway. "You're sure you don't want me to stay a bit, just in case they show up again?" I smiled. "If they do, the locks will hold, and so will I." After she left, I stood in my quiet kitchen, the tote bag now empty on the counter. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like it held anything they could take from me. They could rattle the locks. They could make their calls. They could gossip, threaten, and plead. But what mattered most, my dignity, my safety, my choice, was now behind a door they would never open, and I intended to keep it that way. It started with phone calls from numbers I didn't know. I let them go to voicemail, but when I finally listened, the pattern became clear. First was my sister-in-law, Claire. "Martha, I don't know what's going on, but Eric says you've cut him off completely. That doesn't sound like you. Can we talk?" Then Harold's cousin, David. "Martha, families have disagreements, but you can't just shut the door forever. Think about your grandchildren." By the third message, from a neighbor I barely knew, I understood exactly what Eric was doing. He was using other people as messengers, hoping they would wear me down, make me feel cornered. I didn't answer any of them. 2 days later, Evelyn knocked on my door, holding a basket of muffins. "Martha," she said carefully, "I just came from the store, and I ran into Claire. She told me Eric has been saying you're not well, that you're confused, and making bad decisions." I let out a dry laugh. Confused enough to change my locks, move my valuables, and update my will. That's quite a diagnosis. Evelyn frowned. He's trying to get people on his side. I know, I said, and I'm letting him try. Every person he drags into this sees him more clearly than he realizes. That evening, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a name I knew well. Margaret, my oldest friend from church. Against my better judgment, I answered. Martha, she began. Eric came to see me. He says you've misunderstood something about a safe and some money. Margaret, I interrupted gently. I know exactly what happened. I'm not confused, and I'm not changing my mind. There was a pause. So it's true. You've really cut him off. Yes, I said simply. And I won't talk about the details because they're mine to keep. But I will say this. No one accidentally empties a safe or tries to move money out of someone else's account. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. She sighed. I had to ask. He made it sound like. I know how he makes things sound. I said, it's how he's always gotten what he wants. The next day, I took an extra step. I called Michael, my lawyer, and told him to write a letter for Eric, formal, dated, and very clear. It said that he was to have no part in my money, property, or personal matters now or in the future. Copies would go to the bank, the insurance company, and the county clerk. When Michael read it back to me, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. Make sure it's sent by registered mail, I said, and keep a copy in your files. By the end of the week, the pressure from the outside slowed down. The calls became fewer, the voicemails shorter. Either Eric was realizing his plan wasn't working, or he was getting ready for another attempt. On Saturday morning, I sat by the kitchen window with my tea, watching the snow melt in patches across the yard. The world was peaceful, and so was I. I knew Eric still had my phone number, my address, and a whole list of tricks he might try. But I also knew something more important. I was no longer an easy target for him. The door was closed. The locks were changed. The bank box was full. And my mind was made up. If he wanted a mother who could be talked into things, made to feel guilty, or bullied, he'd have to look elsewhere because this one was done. The first warm day of March came early that year. The snow that had covered my yard for months was melting into soft, muddy patches, and the air smelled a little of damp earth. I opened the kitchen window for the first time since autumn, letting the fresh air move through the house. It felt like breathing differently, deeper, clearer. I spent the morning cleaning cupboards, moving slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to take my time. Every dish, every folded tablecloth, every photo in its frame was mine. Mine to keep, mine to protect. No one was waiting for me to leave a door unlocked. Around noon, I made tea and carried it to the back porch. The boards were still cold under my slippers, but the sun felt warm on my face. Across the yard, the lilac bushes were bare, but I could already see the smallest hints of green coming through. I thought about the winter I'd just been through, not the one outside, but the one inside these walls. The cold feeling of realizing that love isn't always enough to keep people honest. The slow, steady decision to put my safety and dignity before someone else's comfort. There had been moments in the early days when I doubted myself. Was I being too harsh? Would this break the family forever? But each step I'd taken, the locks, the bank, the will, the vault, had made the air a little easier to breathe. I hadn't done it to be mean. I'd done it because there comes a time when you must stand up for yourself the way you once stood up for everyone else. The phone was inside, sitting silent on the kitchen table. I didn't need to check it to know that the absence of Eric's number was its own kind of peace. Chloe still called. Evelyn still visited. Life went on, with only the people who showed up without a selfish motive. In the quiet, I realized something I hadn't been able to see before. Losing what you thought you could never lose can sometimes give you back the one thing you truly need: yourself. I drank my tea, listening to the soft drip of melting snow from the roof. A bird landed on the fence, tilting its head as if to look at me. The sun warmed my shoulders. I had no illusions that Eric would suddenly change, or that Julia would see herself clearly in any mirror. That wasn't mine to control. What was mine, my home, my safety, my control over my own life, was now firmly in my hands, and I intended to keep it there. If you've read this far, maybe you know a little of what I've learned. Maybe you felt that same change when you stop asking why someone has hurt you and start deciding what you're going to do about it. So, here's what I'll tell you. Protect yourself. Don't wait for permission. Don't let love be the excuse someone uses to reach into your life and take what isn't theirs. You get to lock your own doors, and you never have to hand over the key.